Okay, we are live. Will Blunderfield, welcome to the Terrain Theory podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you making time for us. Will, to the uninitiated, who is Will Blunderfield?
I was on, I used to be pretty much mostly like a singer. Like I was on a show up here in Canada called Canadian Idol. I made it pretty far, but then the Simon Cowell type judge was like, "You're too theatrical, get out." And then I ended up moving to New York City and I did a theater program there. I won a scholarship. And yeah, I got into yoga through that. I got into spirituality because one of our acting teachers was a yoga teacher, and he would make us do yoga before we went on stage. And I started to fall in love with the yoga way more than like having to go to these stupid cattle call auditions where there's like 600 guys for like the role of Gaston on the Disney Cruise Line, and you have to like take 5 days off work and you make it to like the top two, and they're like, actually this guy's more girthy, we're gonna go with him or something. It's like I started to fall in love with the yoga more, and I moved back to Vancouver, and I basically started to get into music, and I did a singing competition up here, and I won exactly the right amount of money that you need to become a yoga teacher at the time. That was in 2008. I got trained by Alanis Morissette's twin brother, Wade Morissette, and he was combining like English with Sanskrit mantras. And I really liked that. And so I started to write my own sort of mantra English music. And then it got picked up by Avril Lavigne's record label. And then I ended up basically going back and forth between Vancouver and Asia, promoting my music and teaching yoga. And then I got addicted to Coke from like 2014 to 2016. That was really scary. And then I saw a psychic, and she's like, "You need to do Kundalini yoga." And like so many of my students at the time were like, "Please teach us Kundalini yoga." This is like country clubs. I'm like, I don't think they're going to like it if I teach you guys crazy, weird, like squeezing your anus types of yoga at country clubs. But anyway, I got all these messages to start doing Kundalini yoga. I did that teacher training in 2017. And that is what helped me break free of Coke. And throughout this whole process, I would have to say another thing that helped me break free of addiction was learning Germanic New Medicine, because, I thought I was gay, and, all my friends were on what is called PrEP, which is a type of hypertoxic black box drug that basically all gay guys are on right now because they believe it protects them from the fake HIV, which has never been isolated, as we know. And it actually causes AIDS over time. Like if you think about like 14-year-old gay guys being put on this toxic drug, it's like, what are their livers and their kidneys going to look like when they're 40? Like, come on, wake up. It's like so sad that they're basically slowly killing these gay guys. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I started to wake up and I was like, there's something wrong about this. Like I went to the pharmacist and I was like, can I get a pharmaceutical printout, like a manuscript of all the studies and all the information you have on these AIDS drugs and this PrEP? And the pharmacist was like, it's like 150 pages. Do you want all of it? And I was like, yes, please. And I read it all, and it was like showing that if you take this, you're at like a high risk of developing like a fatty hump on your neck, and your liver will start to fail, your kidneys will start to fail. You're at higher risk of bone fractures, because everybody wants bone fractures, right? And so sure enough, then now there's a class action lawsuit. All these gay guys have been permanently fucked for life by these prophylactic AIDS drugs, and now they're suing. I think it's Merck, MERCK, who invented the Truvada drug, which is the one of the PrEP drugs. So anyway, I just started to kind of wake up, and one of my friends was like, "Have you heard of German New Medicine?" And at first I was like, this is really weird because my parents are very allopathically minded. My father's a psychiatrist, and my mom was an occupational therapist. So I was brought up in a very allopathic mindset. So I was like, what? The German New Medicine, the psyche is involved in disease? No, it's separated. But long story short, I got really into GNM. I'm super, like I went to a GNM training last week even. I've been to like a bunch of the international training conferences in Toronto and elsewhere. And that's really what saved my life in the biggest way, is because when you identify as gay, it's really easy to feel vilified and scapegoated. And I was getting into drugs, and I just found it really hard to be part of that community because there is so much projection from the dominator system onto that community. And the funniest thing is when I started to detoxify my body, get out of the fear and come into love through understanding how the body works through GNM, I realized that I'm not gay, I'm not straight. I'm just a human being, And it's interesting when I started to clean up my diet and stop doing drugs. This is just my experience. And a lot of people on the left get really mad at me when I say this, but this is just my experience. My attraction to females started to increase when I started to detoxify from atrazine and glyphosate microplastics through high doses of humic and fulvic acid. And now I respond erotically to beautiful humans, which tend to be nubile young women. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
It's timely that you bring up German new medicine. We just started talking about it on the show in our last episode. We interviewed Steve Falconer, and he had a
Oh,
yeah. So Space Busters, uh,
okay. Yes, he's great.
yeah, and his most recent video talks about it's like debunking chicken pox and then two other things, and the whole first third of that movie is looking at German new medicine. So we
Oh,
got
cool.
into
Yeah,
it a little bit with him, but I'd love to get into it a little bit more with you, and
sure.
first kind of lead with an anecdote because in his video on debunking chickenpox, he looks at chickenpox through the lens of German new medicine and sees the symptoms that we call chickenpox as really like the healing response in children to a separation event. So you
Hmm.
see kids are shipped off to school separated from their parents, and oftentimes the chickenpox will happen within that window soon after going back to school. Well,
Hmm.
my son, who's 6 years old, just started school for the first time. We've never really sent him to school. We moved states to go to get him into this school specifically. He just finished his first week, and he's right now inside on the couch nursing like a fever. And so I,
Yes.
this is a week after watching this piece on German new medicine and thinking, oh, he's just having a response to the separation event, which makes way more sense than an imaginary, anything that he may have contracted at school from his classmates. Um,
Yes.
so how did you?
Separation conflict.
Yeah, so separation.
Totally.
So how did you get into German new medicine? What was it that drew you there?
Um, well, first of all, the separation conflict, I always like to say it's fear of separation,
Mm,
having separated, or wanting to separate in the healing phase.
hmm
So usually the symptomology starts to express itself when the body feels safe enough to go into the healing. Because every so-called disease is actually a significant biological special program of nature designed to assist the organism in a time of unexpected conflict shock to basically get stronger than ever before. And every symptom is actually, it's not that the body is attacking itself or anything like that, or that you've been invaded by a microbe. It's that there's this shock that happens that shunts you into a stress phase where your hands can get cold, you're thinking about the conflict, you're not sleeping. And then when your body feels safe enough to heal, you go into the vagatonic phase, which is like where you get the chicken pox or you get the fever, right? Because healing always occurs in a fluid environment.
Yep.
So anyway, that's really cool that you're seeing that through the GNM lens. Very liberating. And then in terms of how I first, my dear friend Castine, I think it was in 2011. She had me over to her place, and she's like, "Have you heard of German New Medicine?" And I was like, "No." And she got out all the diagrams, and she was showing me what I just explained to you guys about how every disease has a two-phased kind of situation where there's a stress phase and then there's a healing phase. And I just was like, "What?" Like it was so outside my wheelhouse of what I'd been brought up in with my allopathic upbringing. Like I was taught to fear. Like I was taught that like I remember going on a date with a girl and we went to like the teen swim on Friday night in West Van, and she leaned in to kiss me. We were in the shallow end of the pool and we kissed, and then I was like, "Oh my god, I'm going to get a disease." And I like went under after we kissed. I went under and like gargled with the chlorine water cuz I was like, "Oh my god, I don't want to get cooties in my mouth." Like I was that guy. I was such a hypochondriac. I was raised to be a hypochondriac. But the buck stops here. I'm healing generational trauma, and there's going to be no more hypochondriacs in my lineage going forward. Enough people have suffered and been scared of the invisible. It stops here. So at that time, I wasn't really ready to take it in. But then a few years later, with the whole like, getting into sort of the gay scene and seeing all these people go on these drugs and like they're fine before, and then they start to take the drugs and they start to get AIDS symptoms. So I was like, something's not quite like, you didn't have like all these symptoms before, like now your skin is all fucked, and like, but do you think it could be the drugs? And they're just like, no, 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 it's like AIDS. I got AIDS. I got HIV. AIDS. It's like that Captain America, is that what it's
Yeah,
called? Like,
Captain America.
everybody has AIDS.
Yeah,
That was kind of my life. Like everybody was just scared of AIDS because in the gay community, they're so taught to fear this whole AIDS thing. You know, it's part of like being gay is you have to really like believe in vaccines and masks and Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden and Orange Man bad. Like I hate to say it, but like the preponderance of people who attack me online are gay men, and they say, "How dare you say that my friend who died of HIV didn't die of HIV?" And I'm just like, well, like read Kelly Brogan's article and like. Did you read the article? Like I did send it to you, and like God bless your friend. And AIDS symptoms do exist,
yeah,
but the cause of it is far more nuanced and complex than what Dr. Fauci or Dr. Teresa Tam would promulgate it to be.
yeah,
And invariably, the gay men, it's so emotional that they're not willing to do any research, and they just attack me and make hate pages about me instead. And it is what it is. So I just something seemed fishy to me, and I didn't like the idea of having to go on a prophylactic just so that I could sleep around, which I don't do anymore. I've been celibate for almost 2 years because I realized that that's another psyop of the Matrix. Germ theory is a psyop, but also the idea of like sexual liberation and you can just sleep with whoever you want and just go onto Tinder and fuck all the people. It's all great. That's actually a psyop because you take on like sex is like glue. You literally, especially if you're an empath, and I'm sure you guys are empaths too, you take on the karmic propensities and the ancestral shit of people that you are intimate with. And so it's a lot of energy to process if you're sleeping with a lot of people. So I realized that wasn't my thing anymore. I was like, that's not, that doesn't serve me, and that's a psyop. The sort of sexual glorification of sleeping around is a psyop. Maybe it's right for some people, but for me, it was really draining.
yeah.
I hope, does that kind of explain it? It was really because of the I sensed something wasn't right, and I was like, it can't be this way. Like there's something wrong about being taught to be like deathly afraid of each other.
Yeah. Well, before we started recording, we were talking about my friend Celia Farber. She was the first one I heard speak articulately about the AIDS psyop, and she said, "What's hidden in plain sight is the first letter of AIDS is acquired. It's
Right.
something that can be acquired through drugs," which was sort of a light bulb moment for me. Um, and she also says everything is a psyop, which which
Yes.
is a bit chilling when you first hear. Like, well, surely everything can't be a psyop, but the more you look, the more it appears to be true. Seems
Yes.
like you're
Kelly
finding
Brogan
that.
says that too.
Yeah.
Well,
Like, yeah.
the flack that you received from the gay community for refuting the existence of AIDS as caused by HIV uh, makes me think about recent conversations we've had, Mike, just around identity. And so you become attached to you identify as something, and then you've defined yourself. You've allowed yourself to be defined a certain way, and you
Hmm.
become dogmatic about that identity and the beliefs that sort of get wrapped up in that identity. And for folks, it can be really hard to stay like flexible and open-minded and open to new information.
Totally.
It doesn't surprise me that we see the same thing. I see the same thing as I and we refute the existence of, coronavirus and
Hmm.
COVID-19, because who are we to say that people have not suffered and died? Well, I'm not saying that people have not suffered and died this past year. I'm just refuting the cause of that, the
Hmm.
stated cause of that, and that's a fine line to walk in. And it sounds like you lead with love and grace and compassion for the suffering of these folks and their friends, but at the same time, you can't back down on what you know to be true.
Exactly. And the whole, like, there's that book Biology of Belief by Dr. Bruce Lipton, and in that book he talks about the Cartesian split of how the church just historically took ownership of the spirit and the brain, spirit and the mind, and the doctors took ownership of the body, and it was this artificial split. And so that's been promulgated in the allopathic system up until today. And so the idea that you can literally kill yourself with your thoughts, which is 100% true because I've almost done it a number of times in my life, is poo-pooed. Oh no, blame it on the microbe, or blame it on some sort of
Genetics.
genetic thing, right?
Yeah.
because that makes more money for the pharmaceutical companies, rather than realizing that in ancient, sort of pre-colonial places like Australia, the indigenous people had a ritual called pointing the bone. And the witch doctor, the shaman, if they didn't like somebody in the tribe, if they'd done something wrong, the tribe would gather around the convict, and the shaman would point the bone at the convict and say, "You are dead to us." And within a few days, the person would die just through the power of belief.
Mm.
And it's pretty much like what happened in the 80s and what still happens. If you don't go on these drugs, you're going to die. You have 2 months to live, and so all the gay guys are dying. And the understanding, the truth that you can literally cast a spell on somebody to kill them is totally poo-pooed, because it's so true. Anything that's true, they make it seem false, and anything that's false, like injecting tons and tons of heavy metals right into your body, they make it seem like a great thing. Like allopathic physicians love that shit. They love heavy metals.
Yeah.
Well, they actually don't know what's in vaccines. My friends and people who are close to me who are medical doctors, I'm like, do you know what the adjuvants are in vaccines? And they're just like, oh no, we weren't taught about that. We just were taught that it's important to vaccinate. But they didn't actually like learn what's actually in them. Like they didn't learn there's like MSG because you need like Chinese food in your vaccine. They didn't know that.
Where is your relationship at with your parents these days, coming from an allopathic family?
It's get better now because my whole MO these days is trade positions for interests. So with those that we love, it makes more sense to care more about the tone rather than the topic. And also to go for the low hanging fruit and then slowly work your way up the tree. So that's how, one of the ways I almost killed myself is I was so upset that like I finally woke up that GNM is true. The preponderance, I wouldn't say every single biological program that Dr. Hammer outlined is 100% true. I don't believe, for example, certain parts of the teeth and certain specific conflicts that relate to like the back molar. And I haven't investigated yet to fully stand behind all of GNM, but the general understanding that no illness can happen in the body without the involvement of the psyche and the brain rings 100% true. So the basic premise of GNM I stand behind.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just trade positions for interests because I almost kill myself because I believe that my drug addiction was fueled by me feeling like a black sheep in my family, me trying so hard to get them to understand the situation, and just feeling so vilified and scapegoated, not only for not being 100% what our culture would say heterosexual, but also for now not believing in allopathy. It was like a double whammy, and I just couldn't handle it. And so I drowned my sorrow, as it were, in drugs and alcohol, which almost killed me.
Well,
Because in Vancouver, most of the cocaine is laced with fentanyl. And so the cocaine brings you up, the fentanyl brings you down, you get a heart attack and you die. My cousin just died a few years ago. He was just doing a bit of coke recreationally to write music. And then he left behind his young daughter, Ruby, who's 3 at the time, and his wife. So it's really, really an epidemic, is the fentanyl overdosing in Vancouver right now. So yeah, these days it's so much better because we talk about puppies and kittens and Jordan Peterson, and it's great. And now we have a great relationship.
There's a tension also that I experience. I'm also a musician and a writer and an artist and an empath, as you mentioned. And I feel like artistic types, they want to, like, even if it's a trope, at the heart of why many get into being artists is to express truth, to express their truth or universal truths, or where those two things overlap. And in a culture so divorced from truth, where everything is a psyop, there's a lot of weight that I've been carrying around, trying to, as you say, find what that low hanging fruit is, find your way in with certain individuals, be it family, friends. I've spent a lot of time kicking the can down the road and not engaging with certain friends because I feel, and maybe I'm overthinking it. I'm doing so much like calculus in my head. Like, well, what is the low hanging fruit with this person? What's my way in? But at the root of that, it's because, well, who am I to say that I've got it all figured out? But I feel like there's some truth that I'd like to share with certain people. But so that was really inspiring what you said. Trade positions for interests. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I got that from a fellow who his name is Will Wilkinson, and I did a bunch of music videos with my music career with his brother, who's a well-known film producer, documentary film producer here in Canada. And it's interesting because Will has a similar story to me, as like, Charles and his extended family. They seem to be very into the allopathic view and the mainstream view of what's going on, whereas I believe Will is more on the same page as us. And this was maybe, I met Will in like 2017, and I met his lovely partner Tashina, who used to have problems with addiction. And she told me, she's like, I'll always be an addict. So for me, it's about getting addicted to the right things. And I was like, I like that. So
Yeah,
I
that's good.
subbed my addiction to cocaine for Kundalini yoga, because Kundalini yoga is kind of like the Coke of yoga, gets you really high on your own supply. So thanks to Sheena, if you ever hear this, for teaching me that. And then thank you to Will Wilkinson for teaching me to trade positions for interests, because it's just so much better, because then you can facilitate a better tone, even if it's just like talking about literally just like sending cat videos to your family, like
Hmm.
just finding something, going really low and on the
Hmm.
tree, getting those low hanging fruit. And then once the tone has been improved, then now with my parents, um we just slowly work our way up. My parents 100% think wearing masks is ridiculous now,
Hmm.
whereas prior they were into masks. Now they're like, and I don't want to get too, because my family's very private. I'm the only person in my family who's like really out there. They're all very, so I want to respect their privacy.
Yeah.
But the long and the short of it is like, it's so interesting. Now we're starting to like actually come onto the same page, even around the pandemic.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, here's an example. My family's going on a family trip to Palm Desert next month, and I'm not allowed to go because I can't get into your country, because the U.S. is the last Western country that's not allowing organic humans in right now. It's so weird. And some people are kind of able to get in through the land border, but I'm on a chat group on Signal, and so many people are still being turned away, even with legitimate medical exemptions.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so I don't want the stress of that. And so anyway, my mom, she was like, this is ridiculous. Like, you totally should be able to come, like she's on the same page pretty much, and it's only getting more aligned. And the universe, I think the way the universe works is what you resist persists and what you embrace dissolves. So with the people that we love, if they have extremely different belief systems, if we keep pushing against that, it's so fucking stressful, and it's just going to make it all worse. But if we can talk about kittens,
Yeah.
then we can eventually talk about Jordan Peterson, then we can talk about how masks are fucking idiotic.
Really good advice.
Yeah.
It's about maintaining a connection, right? And if it's
Yeah.
cat videos, so be it. But you can't just like go 6 months without connecting and then drop, some Tom Cowan shit on your uncle.
Exactly.
I
Exactly.
I think this is probably a topic for the next time I have you on, Will. But I would like to know more about this bridge between kitten videos and Jordan Peterson. It feels like there's
Yeah.
a lot of ground between them, but maybe maybe you've found those dots to be closer than than I imagined them to be. Uh,
Well, it's like cat videos with my well, actually, I did send cat. I sent a goat video to my parents last night because it was really funny. But usually it's cat videos with my brother and his wife, because they're sort of more into the mainstream view, but we get along so well because we love to talk about cats and how crazy cats are. And then with my parents, it's more about like, oh, like, check out this most recent Jordan Peterson interview. Oh, isn't this interesting? Jordan Peterson was just on a podcast and he talks about how he regrets getting the vaccine and he feels
mm,
like he's been psyoped.
Hmm.
yeah,
So it's you just find that you just slowly work your way up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Will, one of the things I'm trying to reconcile about you, given what I've now learned about you and what I brought into this conversation, you are let's see, you teach sexual kung fu, I think is how you describe it on your website.
Hmm.
You are what I say, I think every other video of yours that you post on social is you naked with other dudes and like lion emojis covering your private parts, and you're
Hmm.
like doing these like bro bonding things, but at the same time, you
We call them our sacred bits.
thank you, sacred. Thank you. Let's get those definitions correct. Um, and at the same time, you tell me that you are 2 years celibate, and then also,
Mhm.
practicing things like semen retention. And I just love to know that place, like what is happening here, where you're teaching sexual kung fu, but at the same time, you're 2 years celibate. This like semen retention, sexual energy. These kinds of. I want to get into this topic and where you are in your philosophy here.
Yeah. So I believe that male bonding is like a vitamin. Even Robert Bly, he's like a famous men's work author. He wrote Iron John. He said there's like an invisible substance that gets shared between men when they, gather, and it's very life giving. Like, brother to brother, bone to bone, we heal in tribe, and that whole thing. And so, I studied critical studies in sexuality and psychology and nutrition at university, and I learned about like how prior to colonization, indigenous people all over the world were like naked all the time. And then I was listening to Aubrey Marcus's podcast a few months ago, and he had on Dr. Zach Bush, and then they just randomly started talking about tribes that have yet to be contacted by the Matrix in Papua New Guinea. And his Aubrey's friend went to live with this uncontacted tribe, and they were like naked and like cupping. They're like, oh, and they're like trying to greet him by cupping his scrotum and being like, I see you, brother. And I started to realize that like before the Matrix took over, like as we're talking about everything as a psyop, gay panic is a psyop. Like it took me so long. It took me like 20 years to finally figure out why gay panic exists. And it's that whole understanding that everything's a psyop. Everything that's good for you, they shame,
Mm.
and everything that's bad for you, they elevate. And so it's good. It's good to like do cold plunging with your bros and to like feel confident naked and to, appreciate your body and to be able to be naked in the locker room or other contexts where there's same-sex nudity and not go into gay panic or into shame or into feeling like you're not as virile as the next one.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just something that I feel called to really help men do because it's helped me so much. Because I think a lot of the gay community, it's all about drugs. Like, unfortunately, because of the vilification and scapegoating, there are high amounts of crystal meth use, alcohol abuse, suicide, anxiety disorders, panic related disorders, obesity, overeating, addiction, etc. in the gay community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing that fuels that is this kind of bitchiness and this cattiness and this lustiness. It's like who slept with who, and let's watch RuPaul's Drag Race and all these bitchy queens and the whole thing. It just feels so mean.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what a lot of gay men are missing and what a lot of straight men are missing, and I hate to use those words because for example, the ancient Greeks didn't have those words, but just so that modern people understand what I'm talking about is like all men, I really believe many, many, many men, regardless of your sexual identity, are missing out on platonic comfort between men.
Yeah.
And I remember being in Cubs or Scouts when I was younger, and I remember like there was this other scout, and I just had this like strong desire to like just cuddle him in the tent. And of course I didn't, because you're not allowed to do that in this culture.
Yeah.
It would be your whole identity as a real man would be threatened.
Yeah.
So I just remember like longing to hold this person, but then the shame coming right in. And so I help men transmute the gay panic into like brotherhood and camaraderie in a safe space. And so, I mean, I take it to the extreme because I've been doing it for 10 years. But for new clients, like it's literally like, how about you two hug, you and your best friend hug for 30 seconds without having to like hit each other on the back and just breathe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Try to stay in a place of parasympathetic vagal tone rather than going into like, oh my God, what if somebody thinks I'm gay?
Right. That's great. Okay, so that's like an entry point for a new client. You did say you take things to the extreme. What does that mean?
Yes.
What does that look like? What I
Yeah,
see?
so a more extreme thing would be like an ejaculation ritual, or me and my buddy Brian Carew. He's a movement instructor here in Canada, and he also was involved in the adult entertainment world for a time. and now he does sort of more what I do, like erotic coaching. And so, for example, an extreme thing would be yesterday he came over to my place and we filmed an hour, just over an hour, bro bonding ritual that involved like, what did we do? We like hugged each other naked with our dicks touching for 20 seconds to release oxytocin. We did a cock appreciation ritual. So you look at the cock of your bro and you go, you like breathe to like bring yourself into a parasympathetic response. And you're like sending appreciation to your bro's dick because it's the outermost extension of the heart in classical Chinese medicine. And then you're like, brother, you've got a beautiful cock. So that would be sort of more the extreme end of what I teach.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'll take like groups of men out into the forest and we'll do naked cold plunging, and then we'll like growl and like take our genitals and pull them away from our bodies and stick out our tongues, kind of like the Maori haka, like that kind of energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just getting really primal. Or we'll like come into a horse dance and we'll kind of like look at each other's hairy scrotums and be like, ah, kind of like I see it like a mycelium network. I call it the testiculum. Like when the gay panic goes away and you bring your consciousness down into your balls,
Yeah.
you're more grounded, and then iron sharpens iron. So you're naked with a bunch of dudes growling into your hairy genitals. By the way, the pubic hair is the extra bravery energy of the lungs in classical Chinese medicine. So I encourage guys to like grow out their pubes and just be like a fucking wild beast. Like they've done research on pigs, like domesticated pink fat little pigs. If you release them into the wild, within a few years they grow tusks and they get really hairy and they get kind of more gray. And I see modern men as like little pink little pigs, and I'm helping them to like get hairier and more like wild.
So stop this like manscaping, the cutting of your your body hair, and
Yeah,
so
don't
on.
shave your balls. And
Well,
another ritual you can do is you can grow out your pubic hair, and then that will trap the pheromones, which, if you're healthy, that's actually going to attract women.
that's a great
And
point.
then you can have your girlfriend or your wife, when you get home, have her just take off your clothes, sit you on a chair, and then just have her grab your balls and just sniff them for 45 minutes.
Well,
And that's really beautiful. Or she can put them in her mouth, and you can do what we call testicle breathing. So you basically inhale, let your balls drop, and she kind of uses her mouth to pull them away from your body. And then as you exhale, you pull them towards your body and let her relax on the balls a bit. So she's kind of like sending her extra yin from her mouth into your ball sack to keep it cool while you like do this like reconnection to your balls kind of ritual.
Well, both Mike and I went to the same high school, and we both would have taken sex ed from the same teacher. And Mike, I don't remember any of this being taught in our sex ed classes in high school. Well, Will, I think what I appreciate first of all, I think there's going to be some listeners out there who are like, "What are we talking about right now?" And that's great. And I think that's great because we are a repressed society sexually, right? We get
What city did you guys grow up in?
in Durham, New Hampshire, a little like university town on the seacoast
Oh,
of New Hampshire. Um,
nice.
and as a society, it's funny because on the one hand, any Hollywood movie is just sex, 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 sex. But when you
Yeah.
when you start to talk about it, or bring it into your own little circles, or like at the dinner table, or in the family environment, like it gets really,
I don't talk about sex at all with my family.
fair. Okay, fair. Thank you for.
Sometimes I'll like I tell them, I'm like, don't watch anything of me online. Do not Google my name.
but but
Do not type in my name on Twitter. Otherwise, you're gonna get a nasty surprise.
okay, that's fair. Okay, that's fair. But what you said, well, you're talking about uncontacted tribes in Papua New Guinea where these kinds of activities and connections are the norm. You're talking about ancient Greece where there was no orientation, classification, or labels.
Mhm.
And so what I take from that is these kinds of conversations, these kinds of topics should become more normalized. We shouldn't be
Yes.
uncomfortable talking about our sexuality and the sort of like brotherhood bonding, the male bonding that you're talking about. So
Mhm.
I made a joke, but it was to kind of make a point that um, to the listener who might be like kind of deeply uncomfortable with some of what you're saying, like, okay, lean into that comfort, find out where that discomfort comes from, and
Yes.
let's go. Like we're all sort of on board here. Uh,
Nice.
digi-
Yeah, it's the Aquarian age. It's time to transmute the shame. And
yeah, and
yeah,
it,
most of my clients these days are now men who would identify as straight, who have wives and girlfriends. 99%. because I got canceled by the gay community. Like, for example, I was teaching into the pandemic, and then there was a guy who identifies as gay in my building who was coming to my class. He's like, "Oh, where are you going? Like, aren't you supposed to be like isolating?" I was like, "Oh, I'm going to teach my sexual kung fu class in person." He's like, "What? You're a super spreader. Like, fuck you. You're going to spread COVID in our community." And I just was like, "Oh my God." Okay. So I like stopped teaching live because that happened a number of times. And then I brought everything online. So it seems like the people who are more interested in my work around debunking germ theory, as well as the bro bonding stuff,
Yeah.
they tend to be men who identify as straight or bi, who eat, relatively healthy, who've maybe done some breath work or plant medicines. That just seems to be the demographic now, which I'm totally cool with.
Yeah.
I think it's great. And then the few guys who identified as gay, they do my programs and they'll send me messages like, "Will, like I had a dream about I was making love with this beautiful woman last night. It was really weird. Like, is that normal when I'm doing your work?" And that's the curious paradox of the naked bro bonding and the detox
Yeah.
and the superfoods
Yeah.
and the nature time. You do start to feel more virile. You start to feel like that wild boar. And if your repressed proclivity to procreate has been stifled, it starts to come back to varying degrees. And that's why I don't believe in labels, because I think sexuality is fluid and porous, and doing what this culture would say are gay things actually fuel and buttress heterosexual proclivities and vice versa. Once we get out of the matrix and say, hey, there's nothing wrong with a bunch of dudes getting naked and plunging in nature and then hugging after.
Right. Which is amazing. And I think that right there, God, anyone listening, like sit on that, meditate on that concept, because that's an interesting one that I'm going to be thinking a lot about. I think what I really appreciate, Will, about what you're describing in some of these, like these teachings and these practices and these rituals, is that it and on the one hand it's like, oh, okay, that's really wild and out there, but then you sort of back it up with, by the way, this is the uh, traditional Chinese medicine, sees this part of the body as this, and it's
Mm-hmm.
clear that you're drawing from teachings, like Kundalini yoga. So and also
Mm-hmm.
you're citing historical, like ancient Greece, where these kinds of practices would have been normalized. And so there really does seem to be, like, it's not just this guy who's like trying to be out there for the sake of being out there. It's like you're drawing on a place of deep knowledge and from a number of different places. So I really
Mm-hmm.
respect that. And I think that's
Thank you.
honestly, that's why I turned to Mike and I was like, we got to get this guy on, because he's doing things that you don't see anyone else doing. And I really believe it to be challenging one of the more like uncomfortable topics that we all live with in our society. And I value that. So, and
Thank you.
that is to say, that's a long-winded way to get around to a question, which is like, where are you drawing some of these like very specific things that you're suggesting, a partner could do, or the rituals themselves? Like, where are you drawing the influences for these specific actions that you take in these rituals?
Chat GPT.
Yeah, there it is. That's where I got all the questions for this interview.
That's where I get my infinite wisdom.
Yeah, there it is.
Just be like, give me 5 examples other than the classic trope of ancient Greece where dudes would bond naked and do erotic shit together while their wives were on their periods. It's like,
Yeah.
so that's a really easy way to find out more information.
Yeah.
But again, I did do critical studies in sexuality at UBC, so I got a lot of my information from the 4-year program that I did there, because it was very like in depth in terms of like a cross historical and a sociological and a medical and um, anthropological and even like an English lit perspective on sexuality throughout the ages. And I also do a lot of reading. There's a book that I've been reading called The Double by Edward Selner, where every chapter is like a different culture and a different time and place where male bonding was celebrated. And it's interesting to learn about like even Viking culture. There's not as much evidence because it was destroyed by the British, but they had like naked places where only men could go, like naked sauna kind of type situations, like steam baths and stuff where they would philosophize in the nude. So it wasn't just ancient Greece, and not, oh my God, a beautiful eagle is flying by. I love that. It wasn't just ancient Greece. I always see that as a good sign when an eagle flies by.
Yeah.
It was all over the world, and the thing, people say, well, in New Guinea, they sometimes do it on underage teens, or in ancient Greece, they had pedestry where an old man, a creepy old man would take on a young boy and fuck him. I don't support that, but there's so many different variations of these rituals. And I'm not saying just because an ancient culture did a ritual that we should do it. I'm just saying, isn't it interesting that how diverse all this is? And I just like to pick and choose from ancient cultures. I go, oh gosh, all these adult men feeling comfortable in their bodies and like training naked and celebrating the male form, like that's juicy.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that in my life.
Yeah.
But then like there's a ritual in certain tribes in Papua New Guinea that I would never like. I go, ugh, like, there's one where to become a man, a boy has to stand in the center of like the male space. No females are allowed. And the other older dudes slap his balls aggressively until they get swollen. And if he doesn't flinch, he's a man. Like I would never perform that ritual. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I like the more gentle one where you just like cup the balls and say, I see you, bro. You know?
Right.
So there's many different variations, and at the end of the day, it's always about consent and gentleness. And there was two things I wanted to quickly touch on. So I talked about the Vikings and the some people who might identify as gay might listen to this podcast and go, well, what about me? Like I have zero attraction to women and I eat really well and I'm not filled with atrazine. So, fuck you. And what I really want to share is that cross historically, there's always a small percentage of males who are designed to be what we would call double soul. The indigenous people of Canada called them two-spirit. And they were usually genetically, biologically male, but they had a very, very strong feminine energy and and this is the important part, also a very, very strong warrior masculine. And they were really good at being the mediators between the men and the women in the tribe, as well as the spirit and the earth planes. And when the white colonialists, when the Spanish, the French, and the British came to colonize Canada, guess who they killed off first? They killed off the two-spirit dudes because they were scared of them and they could see their power. And they called them berdache, which is a French word which means like slut or prostitute. And I've been reading a lot of the travel logs of these explorers, and they'll say things like, it's very strange. Like there are these men in these tribes, and they're wearing feathers in their hair, and they kind of look like women. And then there's these other dudes who are like the warriors of the tribe, and they have wives, and their first wife is a biological female. But then like these dudes take on a second wife who's one of these weird berdaches. And the tribe celebrates that. It's like the highest honor to have a second wife who's a gay guy. So that's an interesting thing that was quite common in like 85% of the tribes that I studied at UBC.
Yeah.
And then another phenomenon is the two dudes who were more of the warrior archetype. They were allowed to do same-sex erotic bonding as long as they didn't get married, because the male-female yin-yang polarity was very much lauded cross-historically. But two guys could charge each other up, as it were, using same-sex erotic bonding technologies, and that was celebrated in like over 85% of the tribes in North America before contact.
And that's really, so little of that is mentioned or talked about or taught as it pertains to, indigenous peoples in history.
Yeah, they kind of erased it, and they even did it in zoology. And I always hesitate to use animal models as examples, because people will say things, well, like chimps, they might do gay things, but they also eat their own shit, so not a good idea. So I usually like to keep it to human examples, but it's interesting that like in the 40s, zoologists said there's no such thing as any same-sex erotic behavior in any animals. And then decade by decade, it went from like, okay, well, that we saw 15. There's 15 examples of different species that do that, to like 150, to now like over 150,000. So there was a suppression of the truth, not only in virology, not only in potentially the shape of the earth, but also in how human sexuality works. But there always is a small percentage, back to these berdache or these two-spirit, who are karmically designed to respond erotically mostly to members of the same gender, because in these ancient tribes, when women were menstruating, they were considered to be too powerful for these alpha warrior dudes who often had many, many, many wives and many, many offspring to hang around. So the women would go with the female shamaness into like the red tent and menstruate together and steam their pussies and do like different rituals to sharpen their yin essence. And then the alpha dudes would go to the gay guy, the quote unquote gay guy, for healing. And that would often include sexual healing. And this has all been very repressed. So like we didn't learn about this. I mean, I learned a bit about it at UBC, but we didn't learn about it in like history class in high school, right?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit too about your thoughts on semen retention? Because Steve Falconer was what brought that up towards the end of our conversation. We didn't really get into it in depth, but he did bring it up, and so this does seem to be sort of a staple of your teachings and also your life.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I just think about it like physics. Like, if you want to be the most virile man you can be, if you're eating McDonald's and ejaculating all over the place and drinking and doing drugs and hating yourself and watching Pornhub, so your consciousness is not even in your body, it's just giving your energy to the internet sex beast, you're not going to really like be that potent. You're not going to really want to impregnate women that strongly. Whereas if you do the opposite, like the Vedas say, pratipaksha bhavana, when harassed by negative patterns that don't support life, cultivate their opposite. So when, don't follow the crowd, they're lost. Or Krishnamurti said, it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. When everybody's ejaculating all over the place, maybe try the opposite.
Yeah.
And so I started to try the opposite. And I just was like, oh, this feels really good. Like I can actually feel my balls for the first time in my life. And then I learned in Chinese medicine that the testicles are the turbines of vitality. And I studied a lot with Montauk Chia, who is the grandmaster of sexual kung fu and Taoist esoteric yoga. And he showed us these ancient Chinese pictures of like artistic renderings of the human body. And the testicles are depicted as these water wheels. And there's a man and a woman walking on them. And they're absorbing energy from the sea of qi up into the rest of the glandular system and the organs and up into the brain. And so I just started to try it. And I did a 21-day reset where I didn't ejaculate and I felt amazing. And there's something really empowering about being able to feel your nuts as a dude. And I was sexually abused by a doctor when I was 4, so I couldn't really feel my genitals unless I was fully aroused. But the sexual kung fu and what we call testicle breathing and sexual reflexology, it develops what the yogis call your self-sensory system. And when you develop your self-sensory system in your anus, sex organ, and navel point, you just feel more grounded, literally, because the world doesn't need more balloons. Most men are way too up in their heads. The world needs more grounded men who can really feel and literally mix the blood and the chi in the part of our bodies that makes us men, the cock and balls.
Yeah.
Do you have a meditation practice, and how does this play into that? Because I've just started my research into this, the Christos oil going down your spine into your sacrum and then back up again. And this semen retention seems to be part of, and this may sound hyperbolic, but like enlivening the 60% of our brain that is not being used in modern times. And it's not lost on me that there's some crossover there. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, totally. Can I quickly pee?
Yeah, I'll pause it.
I'm going to just drink some and then I'll be right back. I'm just kidding. I already did that today. I'll be right back.
Okay. Go ahead.
Awesome. So you're asking me about like, how does semen retention relate to meditation and sort of a nourishment of the brain through the cerebral spinal fluid. And so most men's testes and prostates are depleted. I mean, prostate cancer is huge. And GNM would say, I think that's about like an identity conflict or a sort of feeling impotent. Maybe you've lost your wife, or maybe you've lost your wife to a younger man or something, and that could trigger sort of a prostate situation. But I think also like we're exposed to so many poisons and toxins and xenoestrogens. I can't help but imagine that could also influence a deterioration or a pinching off of the glandular health, especially of the sex glands, of the testes and the prostate. And so what I really recommend is men detox. Like often when I coach men in sexual kung fu just means daily discipline. It doesn't mean like Karate Kid or anything like that.
Right.
To people listening. But I'll get them to learn the techniques, retain their semen, eat healthier, detoxify I've got a cleanse called the Ultimate Lifestyle Transformation. And then they start to feel all they want to do is meditate. All they want to do is just sit there and just bring the energy from the anus, sex organ, navel up into the brain, along the spine, the Sushumna Nadi, the bliss channel, And Dr. Christiane Northrup, she says that when you can go to the place in your body where you've been the most traumatized, and for most males, that's the sex organs, and basically start to feel good again in your penis and your balls. David Data, who wrote Way of the Superior Man, he says you become more trustable to women when you can confidently root yourself in your penis. So when you can do that, reawaken that energy. And I always encourage people to chant God's healing light into their cocks and balls to purify the energy. Then it naturally bubbles up. You can chant Hallelujah or Om Namah Shivaya or Om or whatever, just focusing your consciousness into the most traumatized part of the body for most men. Get used to being in your body fully, and then inhale, squeeze your anus. I always say all you need to be happy in this life is a rectum and a third eye. Just squeeze your rectum and then look into your pineal gland and your pituitary, and then keep your spine nice and tall. And you're literally nourishing your pineal gland with the energy of your sexuality. And Dr. Northrup says when you can do that regularly, it enhances your leadership skills and your intuition astronomically. We call it in the Tao, returning the sexual energy to the brain.
There it is.
And then you don't want to keep it there. You want to bring it back down. That's the thing that the yogis forget. They just constantly bring it up, and you go crazy. You can go crazy. So you want to actually bring it up, reinvigorate the brain, the hypothalamus gland, the memory, the pituitary pineal, and then you want to bring it down the front, tongue to the roof of the mouth. We call this microcosmic orbit, back down to the lower dantian of the anus, sex organ, navel. So that could be a meditation. Is you're feeling your balls, you're feeling your cock, you're feeling your prostate. You could even sit on a tennis ball or sit on your left heel, and then inhale, breathe the energy up your spine. Roll your eyes up as you do it, because chi flow is where the eyes go. Nourish your brain. Exhale down the front. And just maybe set a timer for 11 minutes and just do the microcosmic orbit meditation. And that'll make it easier to become more sexually magnetic. And sex energy is life energy. Like Napoleon Hill wrote that book, Think and Grow Rich. And he said people who have very high sex drives, who know how to transmute the energy, are usually the most successful people. But he doesn't explain how to do it. And this is how to do it. What does my vitality feel like between my legs right now? Smile into that feeling, turning it into joy, and then inhale it up your spine. Exhale it down your front. That's really sexual transmutation in a nutshell. What does my vitality feel like between my legs right now? Smile into it, turning it into joy, and then breathe it into the rest of your body. And you're going to feel it more and more the more you retain your seed. And also you can use visualization. So visualize this beautiful golden liquid light in your genitals, in your sacred parts, and then inhale it up to the brain. And then exhale down, rolling the eyes down the front. Most men have a very small balloon, just the penis and balls to hold the energy. And then when it gets too intense, they have to go into Pornhub. But in sexual kung fu, we have the whole body to store the energy. So it's just more surface area. It's easier, more comfortable to store more sexual energy and become more magnetic. Plus, there's less and less shame and more joy. And Montauk Chia says, when you combine the love and compassion of the heart chakra with the arousal orgasm energy of the loins, you actually cause your DNA to replicate at 8 hertz per second. I don't know where you got that, but basically you become healthier and healthier when you can feel the love and the compassion in the heart, fueled by the erotic prowess of the loins. And even Mother Teresa, in one of her last interviews, somebody was like, how do you get all this energy to like help all these people? And she's like, I feel my sexual energy in my lower bits and I allow it to rise up into my heart. And they're like, what?
Not what you'd expect coming out.
Yeah,
of
I was like, really, Mother Teresa? Wow. So she knew sexual transmutation.
Yeah.
And people will sometimes accuse me, the woke leftists. They're like, well, you're not Chinese. Like, you can't teach this. And I'm like, well, Montauk Chia was teaching in my genetic lineage up in the Scottish Highlands to a bunch of dudes. And they were like, oh my God, we do these things too. Like he was teaching shaking the testicles to generate heat and testosterone, and all these like bagpipe dudes were like, oh yeah, we do that. Like we get naked and we go in a warm room, we shake our balls to get warm, and then we go and play the bagpipes with our kilts without any underwear. So it's like this was done in many places, not just ancient China. It's just because of historical reasons that the Chinese teachings and the Ayurvedic and Indian teachings are more intact. like, for example, in India, largely because of the Sikhs, they fought off the offenders who would have probably burned all the books and all the teachings. So thank God for the Sikhs. But I mean, for example, my ancestors up in like the Druids and stuff, that would kind of be like, I would see that as like the equivalent of like the two spirit or the double soul is the Druid kind of archetype. They all of that technology was not written down, or it was reinterpreted in a puritanical way by the British colonizers. It used to be more wild and free up in the Highlands. And for example, the British said, no, you cannot wear your kilt. That's disgusting. Put on some underwear. They weren't even allowed to wear their fucking kilts.
Yeah.
Let alone do erotic bonding rituals.
Yeah.
But there is evidence. There's certain Celtic stories that were written down by the British religious officials, and you can kind of tell like they shifted it from like two bros, sucking each other's nipples before battle to bond, because the nipples relate to the endocrine system. They relate to all the glands. So when you massage your nipples, your mushroom of your cock or your balls, you're improving your entire glandular potency. So many different warriors, like the Sacred Band of Thieves, they'd be these pairs of males who would bond erotically, and then they'd be more apt to protect each other on the battlefield. When the British took these stories, they Britishized them, and they were like, oh no, they're just friends, and like they just shared the bed, but they didn't touch. They just lay there. Oh. Connect with my guides. Alexa's reminding me to connect with my spirit guides.
You said this is a reminder you set for Alexa.
Yeah, I was like, because I was doing breath work a few days ago, and I forgot. I was like, oh right, I've got all these guides, and sometimes I forget that I can connect with them. So I was like, Alexa, remind me over the next few days at like 12 noon Pacific Standard Time, just to like connect with my guides.
Amazing.
Because they're there. And that's actually another beautiful thing about semen retention is when you retain your seed, your glandular system gets more juiced, and then you can nourish your kidneys with the energy from your balls that you've been storing, that you've been conserving. So you can shunt the energy from your left testicle up to your left kidney, and your right testicle to your right kidney, because the kidneys are the batteries of the body and they store ancestral chi. In other words, you can connect better to your ancestors and your guides when your kidneys get nourished by your balls. And so when you retain your semen and then you start to do testicle breathing, don't start right away by bringing it up to the brain. The world needs more grounded men. Bring it up to your kidneys. In Chinese medicine, men are rooted in the kidneys and women are rooted in the liver. So you basically sit on the edge of a chair naked with your balls hanging over the chair, and you just inhale, let your balls drop and fill. And if you're in a group of guys, you can feel the extra yang energy being created and absorb it through what we call the pelvic consciousness or the testiculum, right? Just like the mycelium network in the forest are shunting nutrients to the trees to help the forest become healthier. When you drop the shame, when you drop the guilt, you can actually feel that subtle improvement of your glandular potency through these erotic bonding rituals. Or if, say, you're overheated, get your girlfriend to gift her extra yin through her mouth into your balls, like we were describing before.
Yeah.
Depends on what you need. And then you just inhale and breathe the energy. Inhale into your balls. And then exhale, pull your balls up and allow some of the energy from your left testicle to water wheel itself up and wrap around the back, up the back, down the front of your left kidney, and then right testicle up the back, down the front of the right kidney. Just visualize this beautiful blue, if you're prone to overheating, or gold liquid light. So you inhale into your balls, the balls drop. They get big like two lungs. They tingle perhaps. And then you exhale and you shunt using the power of the anus, the pelvic floor. You power lock some of it up into your kidneys. And then when I do that, because I've been retaining my seed regularly and eating relatively healthy, I start to like be able to connect with my spirit guides. I can feel their presence. I can feel my ancestors' presence, almost like there's hands holding me at my kidneys. And you just feel more supported by the universe. And it's almost like the juice of we call it Jing Qi in the Tao. It's the most powerful energy. So if you took your body and you wrung it out like a washcloth or a sponge, all the juices that would come out would be your Jing Qi. And so when you got more Jing Qi, you're more able to connect to your guides. This is what I found. Also, when you're in a state of parasympathetic nervous system, it's very interesting how it works.
But so,
So retain your seed.
but sometimes you need Alexa to remind you to do so.
Sometimes you need Alexa to tell you to, like when you're forming a new habit,
Sure.
right? Because I still have these like patterns where I kind of like I forget that I have these guides, and I'll get back up in my head, right? So that's why I have to do at least 20 minutes of breath work every day.
Yeah.
I like that you referred to these techniques as technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Like just the breathing, intentional breathing as a technology. Of
Yes.
course, there's Alexa over there as how we in modern man construes what technology is, but you're talking about a much different type of technology,
Mm-hmm.
passed on through the ages and burned in libraries, and it's really beautiful to see this coming back. I don't know if I'd say to the mainstream, but we're talking about it. Here we are.
Yeah, it's getting more and more mainstream. There's a quickening happening, and there's that 100th monkey theory.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm getting tons and tons. Like I do these naked 5-day bro challenges where we do it on Zoom, and we changed it from movement and sexual kung fu to basically like a bunch of dudes self-pleasuring together on Zoom. And it's like mostly men who have girlfriends and stuff, and it's like gotten so popular. And I think enough men are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think this pandemic woke up a lot of men, and they're like, okay, something's a bit off here. Like, what? They want us to do this, and inject this, and not connect. And it kind of like inadvertently woke up a lot of dudes. And so now our workshops are like overflowing. It's really, really awesome.
Well, it's something I wanted to ask you about, Will. It does feel like that male energy, the masculine, has been under attack. And this phrase
Mm-hmm.
toxic masculinity gets thrown out a lot. And then certain practices fall under the umbrella of toxic. Uh, and it does feel like there's an attack. And it's just a matter of time before something that you do as a male falls under the now umbrella of toxic masculine trait. And you go, wait a minute,
Yes.
what? That's now toxic? And so I'm
Yeah.
curious to know, like, what have you seen, and where's your stance on that? I mean, do you feel that same thing, that the masculine is sort of under attack, and do we even know how to
Mm-hmm.
define that?
Yeah, I mean, because of my Kundalini yoga background, like I studied Kundalini yoga in India, there was a huge focus on the endocrine system. And I look around, and I see modern men like sort of like a chihuahua. Like Daniel Vitalis calls modern men um, Homo sapien domesticalis fragilis.
Yeah.
And so when I think of the word toxic masculine, there's a movie on YouTube called The Disappearing Male. And they talk about the thousands of chemicals that women are exposed to when they're gestating fetuses. And unfortunately, the preponderance of these chemicals act as feminizing agents on the fetus. So the promulgation of a pinched off masculine, a toxic masculine, is far higher. In other words, there's more of an effect of these chemicals on male babies than female babies in terms of the genital expression. So what we're seeing is, for example, if the mother's been exposed to certain levels of atrazine, which is sprayed on 60% of all American conventional corn crops, the likelihood of her male baby being born with intersex genitals is higher.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a thing that scientists use to measure masculinization in babies or in humans, and it's called the anogenital distance, the literal distance between the anal opening and where the ball sack starts. And in male fetuses that have been exposed to atrazine in the womb, the anogenital distance is very small. And sometimes the atrazine has caused one of the testicles not to descend. It'll just stay stuck kind of like as an ovary up in the abdominal cavity.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you look down at your scrotum, there's that line, right? There's that line where it looks like the scrotum has fused together and the underside of the cock has fused together. That's because we all start as like a female blueprint in the womb. And then if you're XY chromosome, the testosterone causes the balls to descend through the abdominals, and the labia start to fold together and they fuse, becoming the ball sack. Excuse me. And the clitoris starts to turn into the penis. And what happens with all these chemicals is it stunts that. So we become toxic. We become the toxic masculine on a glandular level to varying degrees, right? There's many different ways that the matrix turns the masculinity into toxic. So there's the emasculating chemicals. There's the ritual of genital mutilation. There's something called premature forcible foreskin retraction, which is what happened to me, where the doctor prematurely rips your foreskin off the head of your dick. There's all these different ways. There's childhood sexual abuse, which is super common. Like so many men who I work with were sexually abused as kids, myself included. So there's many ways that systemically the matrix creates us into toxic beings. Also, pornography is free.
Yeah.
If it's free, you're the product. And so I honestly believe, I've been reading this book called Circumcision, the Hidden Trauma. They talk about how like there's correlations between like men who are circumcised and like violence towards women. And so I think toxic masculinity is actually designed. There's also the gay panic, right? It's a multi-pronged approach that the Matrix takes to turn men into toxic versions of themselves on a hormonal, but also a psychic level. And then that shunts men into a state of competition and comparison, because they know on some level, their psyche knows that their penis is not fully developed and their testes have not fully developed. So they compensate by engaging in what our culture calls toxic behaviors, because they literally have been stunted by the Matrix.
That's an awesome explanation. Literally toxic first.
Yeah. Literally toxic.
It-
Plus all the food that people eat. Like, for example, we've been taught, oh, having a beer, it's so masculine. Have a beer with your bros and watch the game. But even without the glyphosate, which is in 95% of all beer on the market, there's the fact that barley and hops act as xenoestrogens naturally.
Right.
And another matrix indoctrination mechanism is at some point in history, it was decided that beer had to be made with water, barley, and hops, which are feminizing. But prior to that, there were types of beer that our ancestors had in the Viking times called berserkas, where they would have these beer that it was not barley and hops. It was like different types of herbs like rhodiola, where it would really get them into like a really intense state and then be like, and then go into battle. But those types of beers were like banned.
Yeah.
So that's another way that like toxic masculinity, we're not allowed to express our anger. And so we keep it in. We're hormonally neutered. And so we're just not in the ideal state. Like I think the feminized man is the true toxic man, because it's then your desire to be your true masculine self, it's still there, but it squirts out in maybe inappropriate ways.
Right. Well said. And I'm glad you brought up circumcision. That was on the list of things we wanted to talk about, because you do go hard on circumcision in your on your social channels, and it really resonates with me. I've had this conversation recently with folks that thinking about trauma, and that birth, I think, is trauma number one for all of us. No matter what kind of birth you've had, like the act of being pulled from your mother's womb or delivered from your mother's womb, that's a traumatic moment. We all, we can deal with it and cope with it however we want. But for many men, I see circumcision as trauma number two. And, and I was circumcised. I'm not going to speak for anyone else on this podcast, but I do a lot of thinking on that, and part of it now, most recently, because of some of the videos that you've shared, some of those being almost like instructional videos for those in the medical industry who might go on to perform such a that procedure, and you are seeing things, hearing things, specifically the reaction of the baby, that I don't think parents who subject their child to this ever have the privilege of hearing prior to making the decision to circumcise their child. And if they did, I don't think they would make that decision. But I don't like to judge parents and their decisions. And certainly, my folks made their decision to have me circumcised. But I would love to just go into that a little bit and understand a little bit more about why you are so outspoken against it. And then, maybe talk us through that procedure itself and why you find that to be a trauma.
Yeah. Well, one of my mentors, Dr. Christiane Northrup, she wrote praise for the book Circumcision, the Hidden Trauma by Ronald L. Goldman, PhD. And so she was talking about it on my podcast, the Urban Yogi podcast. And I think when did I start to wake up that circumcision was bad? I remember when I was like 6, I was having a shower. I was having a shower with my dad. Maybe I was younger. Maybe I was like 4. And I looked at his penis. I hope he doesn't mind me talking about this. And I was like, his is different. And I looked down at mine. Mine had like the skin on it and his didn't. And I was like, Mom, when I was in the shower, like Dad's penis looks way different than mine. Like, what's going on? And then my mom was like, Mark, like they didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to say. Um, and in 1985, the Canadian Medical Association decided it was no longer appropriate to routinely circumcise boys in Canada. I was born in 1985. My parents are medical people. So my foreskin was literally saved by that 1 year. If I'd been born in 1984, I would have been circumcised as well. And I think the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because when I started to teach naked men's yoga and naked co-ed yoga, I would look around the room and I would see the circumcision scars and I would see what are known as skin bridges. You can't help but notice it's so visceral, where there's bands of skin somewhere along the mushroom connecting to somewhere along the shaft that you could literally stick your fingers through. Some had like 4. Some, the bottom of the mushroom had been completely ablated, so they told me they have to sit down to urinate.
Mm.
I was teaching in Hollywood. One of my students in the naked yoga class, his entire mushroom was missing. And he had reached out to me later saying, you know, I think I've got trauma around this. Like they accidentally cut off the entire head of my manhood. And I just started to go like, of course people don't talk about this. There's so much shame around this. We're not allowed to talk about this. So I have a unique vantage point because I've seen literally thousands and thousands and thousands of penises over the last 15 years. I would say 80% of all circumcised penises are what most people would say, oh, that's a botch. It's very, very high, but it's not talked about. And I would say every circumcision is a botch. And I call it male genital mutilation now because we have to realize that it's a violation of the right to bodily autonomy and that babies and children cannot consent.
Yeah.
And so I have nothing against body mods, but they have to be done on people who are of age.
Yeah.
It's just physics. Like come on, people wake up. Like that's why I'm so vocal, is I just see it as this, when people wake up and discover the horrific, the horrific sort of blood sacrifice ritual that male genital mutilation is, and the repercussions it has on behavior in our society, there's going to be an outrage, and people in 100 years from now are going to look back in shock that this mutilation was practiced on unconsenting humans, strapped down to a board, screaming. And then some people will be like, well, you know, I had my son circumcised and it was just a little snip and he didn't scream that much. Who cares? I don't care how much or little you scream. You can't consent when you're 8 days old.
Yeah.
You know, and then I'll talk about the Orthodox Jewish version, which still does happen, not as common, but it still does happen, and it is still perfectly legal, where the religious official, first, like one of the family members holds the baby, they get the baby drunk, and then they don't use anesthetic because in their belief system, the more painful it is, the better, because it's a way to stunt the potency of the male phallus. And then the religious official will cut off the foreskin. First, they have to, this is getting into sort of the procedural aspect of it.
It's fine.
They'll either use something called the Mogan clamp or the Plastibell or I can't remember the other one, but the Mogan clamp is typically used in Jewish circumcision rituals. The whole family is like around the baby. They're eating food and like cheering. It's really fucked up. And it's not just Jewish. There's other certain African tribes that still do versions of this. So I don't want to single out, you know, people say, yeah, I'm anti-Semitic because I talk about circumcision. No, I'm against all forms of male genital and female genital mutilation, regardless of the culture or the religion that practices it. Islamic, for example, practices it still.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't realize that regardless of the technique you use to remove the foreskin, you first have to take a sharp instrument and stick it in between the baby's dickhead and foreskin, because there's something called the hymenal membrane that keeps it. It's kind of like how your fingernail is glued to your finger. It would be like taking a scalpel and sticking it between your finger and your fingernail to take off your nail. That's what they have to do, because the hymenal membrane doesn't dissolve until a boy is anywhere from like age 4 to sometimes 19 or 20 years old. And so to anybody listening out there who's chosen not to mutilate their baby, good for you. But remember, don't pull the foreskin back. because that's actually what happened to me, and that is very traumatic, and that can cause scarring, which might have to result in a circumcision when the boy is 11 or 12.
Hmm.
It'll cause phimosis. People are like, well, what about phimosis? I'm like, well, most cases of phimosis were caused by an idiot doctor who pulled back the baby's foreskin prematurely and they fucked it up.
Yeah.
And even if, regardless of the cause, you can use massage and what are called phimo-stretch rings, where you take these almost like shishka dolls, sequentially bigger rings, and you put some lube on them and you just stick them in the head of the dick, and over time it opens up the foreskin. So you don't have to be circumcised to deal with a tight foreskin. But also you have to remember that just because your foreskin hasn't fully rolled back, say by the time you're 10, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to roll back by the time you're 12 or 14. You just have to be patient. Our culture is so impatient, probably because the balls are so small and everybody's just like lustful and like filled with atrazine. They're just like, let's just cut off his foreskin.
Right.
It's like, be fucking patient. Grow a pair of balls and try something new. Try being patient, you stupid fucking doctor. Don't cut off the foreskin. Just chill. It'll roll back naturally over time.
Yeah.
And of course, what you resist persists. So the doctor's like, well, you got to pull it back. You got to clean it. It's going to get infected. And so the child is trying to, I remember I was told by, I can't remember who, but they're like, oh, you have to pull it back to clean it. And I was so upset because I could only get it back halfway.
Yeah.
And I remember like at recess, like in the bathroom trying to get it back. And I was like, oh my God, it's not going to go back. I'm going to have to get circumcised. And of course, that creates more torsion, which causes it to tighten up more. So only clean what is seen. So what they do is they basically destroy the hymenal membrane, and then they artificially pull back the foreskin prematurely. And then they basically stretch it in the Jewish tradition. They'll stretch it and they'll take the Mogan clamp, which is a steel clamp, and they'll take the foreskin, they'll kind of like put it through the clamp, and then they'll take a scalpel and they'll go shh, and they'll like cut off the foreskin, and the baby's just screaming, and everybody thinks it's cool, and like all the people have their iPhones and they're like recording it, and it's just very strange. There's a lot of this footage in the movie American Circumcision by Brendan D. Murata. It's a really good one. It used to be it used to be on Netflix, but now it's on Apple TV for pay. But it's a really good eye-opening ritual, because a lot of people think that circumcision in the US initiated through like a religious thing, but it was actually through Harvey Kellogg and through the whole sort of Victorian Puritanism of, oh, if your son's masturbating, cut off his foreskin. If your daughter's masturbating, put some carbolic acid on her clitoris. That's what they said. That was like the health regimen, because they believe that masturbation caused like so many problems, and they believe that circumcision cures so many problems. And every year they come up with other stupid justifications and excuses to do it. Oh, it prevents AIDS, or oh, it prevents STDs, or oh, it's cleaner, it prevents cancer. Oh, if you're uncircumcised, you're going to give your female partner cervical cancer. Like all this bullshit that's not backed by science. And what I really want to hit home is that no medical association in the world recommends circumcision. And it's been like that for many decades now. So even the allopathic system doesn't even recommend it anymore. And there's actually literally no benefit to it. And for people who've been circumcised, I created a mini course with a friend on restoration techniques. And I've seen some really amazingly restored foreskins, depending on how much skin they took off. If it's super tight, it's hard to stretch it. But if there's some skin left, you can take the skin and put it through a TLC tugger, and the body doesn't like the tension, so it creates new cells. And over a few years, like I've seen some of my colleagues were able to actually fully regrow the foreskin to the point where it looks like an intact penis.
Wow.
And then there's also a company called Foregen, FOREGEN.org, and they're currently in their animal trials. It's a little bit inhumane and gross, but they're trying. They're basically they shave a bit of hair off the back of the sheep, and then they put a human foreskin on the back of the sheep and they grow it. And they've actually been able to grow so they completed the animal trial and they're going to move on to human trials. Some of my students are signed up for the human trials, and they're going to use stem cells to basically regrow your specific genetic blueprint of your own foreskin back onto your foreskin, back onto your penis.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are there countries that have made this procedure legal?
Germany, was it Germany or Austria, the Netherlands, Scandinavian countries are trying to make it illegal.
Yeah.
Alexa, is circumcision illegal anywhere in the world?
From Hewlett.com. Male circumcision is not illegal anywhere in the world. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Thanks for your feedback.
Now,
My guides told me I could use Alexa. People are like, you're a hypocrite. There's so many robots in your apartment. But then my guides were like, just don't worry about it. Just go with it. Like they're already spying on you. Like,
but how do we
they're
how do we know Alexa isn't in on the
isn't.
circumcision?
Oh yeah, maybe she's like a circumciser.
Yeah.
We don't know. She could be.
We don't know.
She could be the ringleader. Who knows? Or maybe Siri. Maybe Siri and Alexa are like the orchestrators of the whole thing. I don't know.
It seems to me, this is anecdotal, but younger parents that I know who have had sons, I see more of them choosing not to circumcise, and I imagine that is
That's
a
good.
nationwide trend, that this might be on the decline.
Yes, it's slowly going down, and in certain states it's still relatively common. Like I think in certain states in the US it's like 60%, but then other places it's like 40%, whereas prior it was like 70, 80, 90, 95% everywhere
Yeah.
in previous decades. So
Yeah.
it is improving. Yeah.
What-
And again, if people want to get it done when they're an adult, that's fine.
Sure.
That's totally fine by me. Just do the research. Like if you actually research it, you're not going to do it because you're going to realize that you're destroying over 18 functions of the foreskin. It can also cause vaginismus. And if you've got a female partner and you don't have a foreskin, it's literally like taking a toilet plunger and plunging all of her vaginal juices out slowly, because the foreskin is actually there not only to glide over the penis to make it more of a juicy erotic experience, but also the foreskin acts as kind of like a bunched up balloon to keep the vaginal juices in while you're stimulating her. So sometimes women who have circumcised partner will have to use more lube, or
Yeah.
it's like a compensation for something that has been designed over millions and millions of years to perform many different functions.
Yeah. It's just one more way in which we've looked at the human body and thought like, oh, nature made a mistake, we should correct it, and how
Yeah.
wrong we've been.
Yeah, well, it's part of like, I kind of see it like how people will dock the ears and cut off the tails of their dogs and have them neutered and stuff. And I understand they don't want more the dog. I was teaching breathwork to a lady and she's like, I had to get my dog fixed because it like impregnated all the female dogs in the neighborhood. And I was like, oh, okay, I see. But yeah, I think it's very deliberate. I think it's part of the predatory capitalistic structure, because if you can cut men off literally from the part of their body that makes them wild and free, then you don't have to put a literal cage around them. And that's why I recommend men who've been circumcised do some shadow work around it, feel into your cock, look at the scar, see what comes up, stay out of story, and just stay in the feelings and do some breath work, like do some conscious connected breathing into the anus, sex organ, navel, and allow yourself to like scream into a pillow, hit the pillow. You can get a facilitator to help you, like just a conscious, like a breathwave facilitator, conscious connected breathing. I'm sure there's one in your area, where you just basically feel if there's anything there. Also, Shaman Durek taught me a ritual you can do. It wasn't specifically for circumcision, but you could use it for different types of traumas in the roots. You could say, soul, I want you to remove any imprints and trauma from your cock and prostate out your mouth through sound and breath for the next 15 minutes. And then just set a timer and just see what happens. Because our issues are in our tissues, and when you feel it to heal it. Somebody said if you want to feel better, you've got to get better at feeling. And I think a lot of men just don't want to go there. But I think if you allow yourself to go there in an empowered way, that it could be potentially healing for the psyche.
Yeah.
That wasn't that different than talking to Alexa just then. It's again this technique as technology. Soul, help me release.
Yeah. Yes. And that's what Shaman Durek said, because he said, like, we're programmed by our parents, like, or society or our teachers, like, you've been a bad boy, Johnny. It's always in the second person. So if you can work that to your advantage by saying, like, soul, like, turn up your energy by 50%. Like, that's Shaman Durek's thing. It's like, soul, I'm loving this feeling of ecstasy within me. Turn up 150%. Whoa. That's what he does with his clients. Yeah.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've really opened my eyes to so many topics that I've been wanting to explore, and I really thank you for taking the time. very rarely do I go back and listen to our episodes. I sort of edit them, publish them, and then, kind of move on. And I feel like this is,
I'm like that too.
yeah. But honestly, I already know I'm going to have to come back and listen to this like multiple times, because you're just addressing a lot of issues that, I'm feeling like I face. And, so much of what you're putting out there is just so intriguing and really resonates, and all this stuff about, bro bonding and masculinity. I can't thank you enough for doing the work that you're doing, because I really think that it is really benefiting society. I know without even talking to any of them that it's benefiting the people that you're working with. You can just see it. You can see the release, and the tapping into something that has been there but has been cut off. So really just want to say thank you for doing the work that you're doing, and also for spending
Thank
some
you.
time and to share your story with us. Um,
Thank you. It's really great to come on a show where other brothers understand the fraudulence of germ theory, because a whole generation was taught to be scared of sexuality and other people, and that was a huge hurdle for me. It was like I wanted more friends who understood that germ theory was fraudulent, because I wanted to be my true self and I wanted to be able to talk about these things with my friends. And now there's Alex Zek and that whole group of dudes, and
yeah,
Aaron Abkey, and just all these amazing dudes who are doing awesome things like you guys all around the world. I'm on like a bunch of chat threads that Alex started with, like he calls it Real Sacred Men, and I'm not sure if you guys are on it, but like he's got all these different groups, and I just feel so connected. Plus, I've got my Vancouver Germanic New Medicine tribes, and yeah, so thank you for being the Aquarian men that the world needs right now. And to anybody listening out there who might be uber triggered by what we've been talking about, especially in the bro bonding, um, you're probably the first man. If you choose to do some of these technologies, you're probably one of the first men for thousands of years addressing gay panic head on. So of course the gay panic's going to come up, because the Matrix doesn't want you to heal that, because they make lots of money off of men being separate and weak and full of competition and comparison, which is the reason why gay panic and homophobia exist. So a great mantra that you can do, say you like decide to go for like a naked plunge, and then you're like, oh my God, I'm naked with men. Oh shit, am I gay? Just say to yourself, I am shameless. I am fearless. I am doubtless, because fear in the present moment is fear. Fear in the past is shame, and fear in the future is doubt. So be easy on yourself. The gay panic will come up, and then just transmute it. Spend more time outside in nature barefoot so that you can release it. It was never ours to carry. It was never mine to carry. I lay it down.
I love it. Will, what are your non-negotiables, those daily habits that you do to tend to your terrain?
I eat superfoods. So I usually fill my body with like Chinese herbs in the morning, because they're usually complete protein. And then I kind of calorie restrict until the evening. So my non-negotiables is kind of that sort of lifestyle of, like, I guess you would call it like the warrior diet, where I don't actually eat a full meal until 6 o'clock. I was just drinking my power shake from Purium. iShopPurium.com. Use my code Urban Yogi for 25% off the ultimate lifestyle transformation. I got terminated from all my jobs for not being vaccinated, so I had to figure out other ways to make money.
Love it.
And it's so much better now, because I don't have to answer to any bosses.
Yeah.
And I get to sell things that have helped me, and testicle breathing, superfoods, all these things I do on my own. So that's another one, is testicle breathing. I do the red light therapy, 660 nanometer, 850 nanometer frequency wavelengths. Learning about GNM, right? Like I've got a little cough, and in GNM they would say it's like a territorial loss in the healing phase, which makes total sense, because I was exposed to like a secondhand smoker in my old apartment for years, and I finally moved to like my dream apartment. And as we know in GNM, the symptoms show up in the healing phase. So I'm away from the conflict, and now I'm healing. So just learning about GNM, so then you stay out of fear, and then your body heals faster. The symptoms haven't been nearly as severe. I haven't had any of these types of flu-like or cold symptoms for 2 years, whereas before I used to get sick all the time when I didn't know GNM. So yeah, learning GNM every day, that's a good one. Cold exposure, morning shower. I turn it cold at the end every morning. And then just to keep it simple. So basically my 3 pillars of just to keep it simple: sexual transmutation every day, semen retention. So I only ejaculate twice a month, gives me more energy, and superfoods and detox. And I guess the sexual kung fu also would include like doing it outside, sort of like rewilding and just spending at least an hour a day in nature.
Yeah. Beautiful. And where can the listener learn more about you, Will?
Go to willblunderfield.ca. WillBlunderfield.com is somebody pretending to be me. I don't know why they're doing that. That's really annoying because I used to own .com, but then it like I can't remember why I got rid of it, and then somebody bought it, and then so now mine is willblunderfield.ca. But I like it because it's kind of a little ode to Canada, and
Yeah.
I used to really like Canada, but now it's not as fun here. But the beauty of Canada is still epic. Like I just try to spend as much time as I can outside the city and just in nature, just meditating and slapping my balls and stuff. So head over to willblunderfield.ca and feel free to reach out to me with any questions or to book a free 20-minute discovery call. And I've been deleted from social media a lot because I talk about medical freedom and ball slapping. So, but if my new Instagram handle is at not Will Blunderfield, trying to trick him.
Oh, I love it. Will Blunderfield, thank you so much for joining us on the Train Theory podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me, guys.
All right, Michael, we're in the after party.
Hi, Ben.
Hi.
What an absolute force of nature that gentleman is.
Yeah, real force in nature. And there's there is this funny juxtaposition of clearly approaching this topic from a place of like sort of sacred respect for this energy that he's harnessing, and then also the use of the phrase like cock and balls.
Right.
Just and it can be, even for us like the podcast hosts who feel like we've maybe heard it all at this point, like it can be a little off-putting, a little like jarring at first, and then you sort of just have to like get over yourself, right? You sort of have to get over that repression or get over that programming that this
Like
is an
get
improper.
over, our own New England puritanical
Yeah, you.
programming.
Yes, yeah, you really do, and just kind of embrace it and go all in. You
Well,
know.
I like that, every teacher has to find their language, then he can bridge that gap between ancestral wisdom and modern colloquialisms,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because he's so steeped in the old knowledge as well, which is inspiring, right?
Well, that right, and that's what I think just gives so much credibility to what he's doing. As I said to him, it's not just some guy who's like trying to be like so out there and edgy. It really comes from a place of like deep knowledge and research.
Yeah. I went through a phase, and I don't even know if I'm out of it, but like because we are in such a repressed society, I felt that urge to just like blow the whole fucking thing up. Like with old songs. Remember my songs were like a little bit more in your face and a little bit more vulgar. Even my play blank, it's like and I mentioned on the last podcast my favorite movie was Pulp Fiction. Like I just loved like sort of being the fly on the wall in those conversations that maybe aren't for public consumption, right? But like that
Yeah,
that people do have, but in a repressed society they don't get aired out. So like
yeah.
there's just an art to how we address it. I think the word that kept coming up for me is nuance, right? This word is like
Mm,
that word is the most important word I keep coming back to these last few years. There's a serious dearth of nuance, whatever the topic is. Like choose your topic. Um, maybe it's born of our polarized two-party, very small cage that we're all sort of subject to. Um, but real world, real life, real knowledge, real history, real wisdom involves an awful lot of nuance and understanding and research. And like, I just love that's basically where I think Will sort of swims. It's like there's the psyop of the free love Tinder end of the spectrum, and then there's like releasing shame surrounding sexuality at large, and that's an awful large playground to explore. And he takes it on like head on, just bring it on.
it does feel like a David versus Goliath. What do you? I mean, what are you trying to dismantle? Like, sexual repression, even having to come out as or identify as gay first, and then stand on the side of actually, AIDS isn't a real thing, or like AIDS is not caused by HIV because HIV does not exist. And so essentially become ostracized by the community that you just identified as, just joined. Um, and then the gay, sort of like gay shame, gay fear, working with folks who would identify as straight to do these activities that, man, really like would really challenge a lot of people. I think just even hearing about it probably throw up all sorts of alarms in our listeners, male and female. And that's one thing I did want to address, Mike, before you respond, is just to the, to the female listener. Like, yes, this was a very like male centric conversation, but I think it was an important one to have, and I think that it's obviously it's all interrelated, and how the males in your life, if you're a female listening to this, like how the males in your life behave and what they've been through, and hopefully this sheds some light, perhaps on them, those folks in your life.
Yeah, that's well said. I think we need to create spaces for um, gender bonding. And there's not a lot of that. I mean, I got invited to a full moon men's circle. I haven't gone yet, but I'm on the email thread, and I just like knowing that that exists. You know?
There's a guy I met maybe like 4 years ago, 5 years ago. He's an artist type. He's a graphic designer. He actually lives a couple towns over. And he and like maybe 4 or 5 others, he basically started organizing what we called the Gentleman's Reprieve. Started a Facebook group called the Gentleman's Reprieve, and we would do these, I would say, biannual, it almost became quarterly retreats. We rented this incredibly nice like mansion on a hill, actually a couple towns down from where I am now, and we would spend the weekend just broing out. Like, we would make amazing food in the kitchen, we would make fires in the fireplace, we'd actually like do role playing, like, fantasy role playing, which
Mm.
none of us, I think maybe one of us had ever really done, or two of us had ever really done, but we just did it because it was a way to get around a dinner table,
Yeah.
a kitchen table, and just like hang out and banter. We'd drink good beers, we'd go on like hikes and walks, and it was a weekend of dudes called the Gentleman's Reprieve, and we've done like 4, 5, 6 of them. I don't even know, and it's an incredibly recharging time to
Yeah.
come back from that and just have bro time. And a lot of that, not a lot of it, but inevitably you would end up talking about like your girlfriends or your wives, or being a parent, and like get into some real deep, heavy shit, and have some bros who you can bounce some stuff off. And like people started to get vulnerable and started to get real, and um, we didn't do any of the scrotum cupping.
There's still time.
There's still time. There's many more reprieves to come.
Yeah. You mentioned beer, and that was something that I'd not thought of before. Is this idea of like different brews of beer? I mean, of course, of course, of course, of
Yeah,
course, of course. Like beer, beer has become just this one. This is just like barley and hops and yeast. But I just love the idea of like beer herbalism. Uh,
bring
like
it
I think
back.
maybe we should bring that back.
Rhodiola beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, bring back the berserker beer. Let's see what happens then. I think we should have some podcasts where we drink that. First, we got to brew it. I'm going to leave that to you. I'm going to first leave it to you to positively identify rhodiola growing somewhere in your vicinity.
Yeah.
And you're going to do that just by eating everything in the vicinity and figuring out which one makes you, a little more berserker.
Yeah.
And you're going to brew it. And then you and I are both going to be consuming that prior to some of our interviews. And we're going to see what happens.
Yeah. One way to find out.
One way to find out.
Love it.
So my question, I think, to you, well, first, Mike, we didn't, I didn't really do a lot of consulting with you prior to getting Will on. I think I like, hey, we should get this guy on. Like, I'm thinking about getting this guy on. And, I don't think you and I really talked about like your comfort level talking about some of these topics. And, you were raised Catholic. There's all like Catholic guilt. Like how much did this challenge your comfort zone?
Oh, I loved it.
You did.
I mean, every second of it. Like I said, like I've dabbled in these waters more in an intellectual place.
Okay.
I mean, Will is like he's living and breathing
Yeah.
this technology.
Yeah.
But it's a place that as an artist I like to spend time in. Absolutely. Like just
Gotcha.
poking holes in really the repression veil.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, but that's as an artist. Uh, an artist exploring the topic through song and art and writing and poetry, but how about an application in real life?
Right.
Like comfort level, like, okay, could you envision yourself even going to one of these like these sort of like bro bonding sessions?
I could.
You could.
I
Well, see,
could.
you're actually comfortable with nakedness.
I am.
And I
I've
know that,
always been on
Michael.
that. Yeah, right.
I know that because you will send me photos of you like sunning yourself and sunning your anus and so on. Now, folks, it's not like he's not sending me the full Monty, but enough is insinuated. And all that is to say, like you are, and I think have probably been for some time, like pretty comfortable being naked, like walking into your yard in the summer completely naked and just soaking up the sun, right?
Well, yeah, and I think it was born of I mean, I've been like I've had that inclination since I was very young. I mean, like teenage years and into college, and like I always sort of thought that because I was into the theater and like for lack of a better term, the theater freaks, like theater people
Mm,
just like they just want to like strip no no pun intended, but here it is, like strip everything down to its like
yeah,
bare essence, right?
yeah.
Whether it's like the script and the words, or like what is the subtext of the scene, but also like theater types tend to like fucking party and get drunk and then get naked. That's like how a theater party used to go, and that was my scene in college and after college. And I even remember like being dared to shave off my pubes and mail them to a buddy, just as like sort of a, it
Okay.
was more of just a dare. Like I bet you won't, and of course I did it because that's like it was almost like you chide each other on. So like I've always sort of reveled in that irreverency, and again like pushing back against more of a like the Catholic upbringing and the what's prim and proper, and uh what happens behind closed doors, and like really reveling in that. So this was honestly, I mean, I don't think I I don't wear it on my sleeve so much, and I don't wear it in my output as an artist so much these days. But I mean, I was hook, line, and sinker all about what he was putting down.
Bet you wouldn't do that now, you pink little piggy man. Right? We're growing it out. I want tusks, baby.
Well, there is something. I mean, it was really interesting because you kept sort of prodding him on this toxic masculinity
Mm,
topic, and I really liked the approach he took because I do think about this a lot. When you mention toxic masculinity, most people aren't thinking about toxins, but
yeah,
that's where he started.
which was really really cool.
I do think about that. I mean, and of course you bring this up, and everyone will say like Alex Jones talking about the whatever turning the frogs gay because of the chemicals in the water. It's
Mm.
like, but it's like, oh no, there's
Well,
a lot.
yeah. I mean, there seems to be some sort of science behind this
Exactly.
potentially.
It's
Yeah.
not lost on me that we live in a cesspit, and it's going to
Yes.
manifest itself. I mean,
Yes.
it's just not rocket science. Come on.
Right. 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 Yeah. And I mean, touchy. These are touchy subjects for sure. And I think neither one of us go into this aiming to offend anybody, right, or to call into question anyone's like decisions on who they are, how they identify, the lifestyle that they choose.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
mainly just to explore, like try to explore these topics in depth and be curious.
what's interesting about Will is like, um, he's a scientist. Like he's so steeped in this, that it's not, it's easy when you're like wading in these waters to fall into cliches or to be like flamboyant because it feels like that's the role. But like he's as authentic, he's like, when you talk to him and look at him, I'm only meeting him through a screen, but like there's a real deep authenticity that comes
Mm,
through, born of confidence. And he's very sure of himself, but not just from like a intuitive place, but born of the research that he's done, like
yeah.
going into that rabbit hole. And so there's something just really comforting hanging out with someone who's that sure of themselves, especially in this arena that is so deeply repressed in our culture at large.
Yeah, and Mike, I think that's really what drew me to him was the confidence that he has, the confidence with which he walks the world. It was like, oh, here's a guy who like really comfortable in his skin, doing some things that there's no question make a lot of people uncomfortable and have clearly like gotten him canceled, and he continues to do it. And that's really fascinating. I'm personally like attracted to those people intellectually because I want to know what they've discovered. I want to know like what it is. Okay, what are you doing in your life? Because there's a good chance that whatever you're doing is going to resonate because you're a human and we're all sort of living this human experience and there's so much overlap for many of us. Like there's a really good chance that whatever you're doing is going to resonate with some people who are going to listen to this podcast.
You
And
know what? Yeah.
certainly to me.
Well, and you know what I love, and I feel like this is a sign of maybe maturity or something, but like he he said straight out, like, yeah, don't send this to your parents, or like, I don't
Right.
talk about this with my parents. Like, I don't share this. It's like
Yeah.
that is really that took me off guard actually,
Same.
because
Same.
most people who are creating content, for lack of a better term, it's the time we're living in. And walking their truth. They just want to fucking spray that shit anywhere there's a fucking flat surface. You know what I mean? Like get
Yeah.
and he has the self-awareness to know that it is not for everybody, and you sort of have to like find it yourself. You can't like force this upon somebody because you will alienate people because it's uncomfortable. Or maybe the whole thing about low-hanging fruit, like that was a really valuable conversation for me to address all manner of topics with our friends and loved ones. It's not easy. Very difficult times we're living in, knowing how to have conversations and when, and not all of them can be cranked up to 11, nor should they be. Sometimes I feel that way though. It's like, well, we got to get to the point here, or like we don't have, as you've often said, we don't have time. We got to like, there's no time to beat around the bush. But at the same time, you don't want to alienate or risk being ostracized by your inner circle by coming on too strong.
Yeah, well, now you've got the 3 touch points. I mean, the plan. It is kitten videos, then Jordan Peterson, and then, scrotum cupping or yeah, died suddenly. You know what I mean? Like that's it. We've got our we've got our strategy. I wonder if Alexa gave him that one. Alexa, what should I send to my parents first if I want them to understand the dangers of mandates? Send them kitten videos and then Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
gotta. That was cool too. I mean, I am pretty dubious about having like an Alexa in my home, although I've got a fucking Siri in my hand,
True, true,
So
true.
it's like we're sort of splitting hairs here, but like
Yeah.
I do also like the idea of embracing this technology and using it for good because I mean, it is good. We wouldn't have this podcast. We've said it before if it wasn't for this crazy ass technology that we are utilizing to share our ideas.
I mean, I think you and I will just be replaced probably within the year. We will have replaced ourselves with 2 AI who can probably do a better job hosting this podcast.
I do
And they'll
think
just,
about that. Someone
yeah,
was just extolling the virtues of apps that can create fine art. You just plug a couple words in and they spit out. And I was like, oh, I know that they can, but like, I still don't even like to like use a drum machine. It's like I'd rather set up some microphones and hit things. It's like there's something to be said for the old school, of course, and ultimately technology will never displace us. I
I
want to
don't
believe
know.
that in my heart.
I do too. I think that I think there's a denialism that's at play there. I think it's an existential threat. I mean, no one wants to embrace a thing that's going to render them obsolete. And that's what so many people are looking at with. I mean, so many people have already seen it, right? Anyone who worked on a factory line, seeing a robot arm replace them. Now you have creatives, folks who are like writing copy or editing video or creating art, like those. Even the creatives, the one thing that you thought could never be replaced, it is going to be replaced by AI. And I don't know that the rest of the humans out there are savvy enough to know the difference. I just don't know that we're capable of knowing the difference between an AI created insert whatever and a human created insert whatever.
Yeah, it's
That's woo.
here we are.
Well, let's just make the most of it, Michael, while we're still relevant. I'll tell you what an AI cannot do.
It's that.
It cannot cut my scrotum. So
Don't speak too soon, man. There's some robots out there.
that's true. The Tesla bot. I think Elon's working on something. Damn you, Elon. Bot bonding. Bot bonding will be the next thing. You know what? There you go. That will be what I do. Will can do bro bonding. I'm going to do bot bonding for the Tesla bots that arrive and feel like a little too separated from one another.
Yeah, they're too
Be like,
repressed.
come on, bots, let's go. We're going to go do some cold plunges and we're going to cup each other's, like, whatever that metal plate is down there that should have genitalia.
Everyone deserves love.
Yeah. All right. We're off the rails. This has been fun, Michael. And to the listener, man, thanks for sticking with us. If you've made it this far, wow, you've got to, keep going. I don't know where we're going to go from
fans.
here.
I know you're funny. I wrote to you, I guess yesterday, like, do you have an idea for this week's podcast? You're like, oh, brother Mike, let me tell you.
Let me tell you. Yeah. And, I guess one thing that we maybe don't do as great a job of, I guess we just leave this up to the listener. Like, what does this have to do with terrain theory? But, the German New Medicine obviously touches on that, how things work. But I just also think, trauma, circumcision as trauma number 2. And then sexual repression, like, no one should be repressed. And I think as males moving through this world, I think we're all going to be a lot healthier emotionally.
Yeah.
If we can express ourselves the way that we're supposed to, and understanding what is trying to keep us from doing that, those powers that are trying to keep us from doing that. That's that awareness piece, right? So first step of that puzzle.
Yeah. And I feel like I say this every time you pose that question, but it's, this is another episode more maybe in the mental health realm and through the prismatic lens where it's all just one. It's all just one. So it seems very relevant to me. So I wouldn't question that.
Yeah. Folks, nothing you heard here should be taken as medical advice, as neither Mike nor I are medical experts. Remember that you are light, you are love, and you are your primary healthcare provider. Remember to hug a person for 30 seconds. No back patting. Just hug it out. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one.